to call the May 27th special meeting of Council to order. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory, the Nunavut First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Karen Robinson. Today's special meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M139. Therefore, members of the public are requested to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Question period will be suspended for this meeting. Council will attend via Zoom or in person at these special meetings, maintaining physical distancing at all times. Members of staff that are partaking in the meeting will be spread out in the auditorium. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Robertson, I don't believe we have any.
We do not.
A motion for approval of the agenda. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We have a series of important reports today. The first is City Spark Public Engagement Strategies. And that's Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. Have we decided where the best place for staff is? At the podium with the microphone?
Just
Right by the coffee machine.
Good afternoon, Worship Council. Thanks for your time. Certainly excited to be here today. As outlined in the agenda package, the first is to provide Council with an update on your strategic policy review that you embarked on a few months ago now, but specifically to get your endorsement to proceed with the public engagement strategy. And I'm going to turn it over immediately here to Ms. Bhopal Singh, who's going to, I believe, introduce our consultants and run you through a little bit of a presentation and outline on the strategy itself. So I'll turn you over to Ms. Bhopal.
Thank you. I'm just going to turn the microphone on.
Do I have to do it over again?
Good afternoon. As Mr. Lindsay stated, I'm Lisa Bhopal Singh, the Manager of Community Planning. And for the purpose of both Council and members of the audience who may not be aware, on February 24th, we presented to Council a terms of reference which they endorsed for a project called City Spark. And what this is an integrated planning process that looks at reviewing and updating 6 pretty key documents for the city. The first one is the 2008 Official Community Plan. The second one is the 2005 Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan. The third is looking at creating an active and sustainable transportation plan. And then also tied to this is integrating through a combined engagement process an economic development strategy, a water supply strategy, and also last but not least, a climate action plan. So the idea behind this is looking at a way of bringing together synergies to coordinate engagement, allowing for engaging our community in an effective way without repetition, and also looking at economies of scale by combining engagement for 6 very important strategies into one process. So Council endorsed the terms of reference on February 24th, and with that we said we would start implementing that, and a key part of that was developing an engagement strategy. So since then we have hired our consultants, and we're very pleased that we retained Lanark consultants to undertake this important work for us. And they will be going through an overview of the draft engagement strategy. And before I turn over to them, the other thing that Council saw on February 24th was the results of a branding exercise that was coordinated through our a consultant called Array, through our communications team, and that material has been handed over to Lanark to use as part of the engagement strategy. The other thing I'd like to point out before handing over and discussing the engagement strategy in further detail is, since we were before Council, we've completed the land inventory and capacity analysis that looks at our future residential needs, commercial needs, industrial needs, and recreational needs in our city, and also demographic analysis. And we will be coming back to Council at another special Council meeting to go over the results of these studies in more depth. So just to let you know that is coming. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Jana Zielinski and also Kate Evans with Lanark, who will be running through the draft engagement strategy. And as needed, staff will be on hand to answer any questions. And we are absolutely thrilled to have Lanark on board with us.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Can everyone hear me?
I think we're good.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. This is my first Zoom meeting with you folks, so if something goes awry, let me know. But you should be able to see our presentation. Can somebody let me know if that's okay?
It's not showing yet. Oh,
Not yet? Okay, I'm going to try one more time. How about now?
that's good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having us today. We are really excited to talk about kicking off the proposed Nanaimo City Park process. As you know, we started planning earlier this year, and we arrived at this very unprecedented time. And so the past months have been a little bit challenging for all of us, but we also see a lot of good signs in the community and the community strength as well. I've been feeling particularly positive in the last few weeks as we see a lot of conversations starting to happen about what comes next. How do we move forward as individuals and as cities and even as a global community? It really shows that our communities and individuals are resilient and that what we're going to do to adapt is going to be something that we're going to have to do along the way. And that's really core to finding a successful future for Nanaimo. There we go. Okay, so Nanaimo City Park is a lot of things, but really at its heart, it's about the people and about what they care about. Community plans are built by individuals and organizations. The Nanaimo City Park is really intended to help us understand what matters most to Nanaimo residents and use these insights to set a future destination and chart a course on a path to take us there. The city is doing something quite unique with the Nanaimo City Park, as Lisa mentioned. Rather than different departments doing discrete plans with separate engagement processes, there's recognition that everything we do is interrelated and overlapping. That means that transportation policy affects climate, land use policy affects our transportation choices, and our economy affects our land use. So basically, everything is linked. When we're planning on any topic, we're ultimately affecting everything else connected to it. Helping people understand this interconnectedness is important, and so Nanaimo City Park is engaging people on all of these topics together. When we get to the end of this process, we're anticipating a series of plans that are strongly aligned and provide an illuminating vision and a logical roadmap for tackling the future. To sum it up simply, the Nanaimo City Park is intended to figure out what we want to achieve and then take us there. So as we launch into this process, it's important to recognize that the world we're in today is not the same world that we were in 10 years ago or even a few months ago. I read a really interesting article last August, that was well before COVID, that discussed how change and innovation is rapidly changing how we live our lives. They used examples like drones and the gig economy, autonomous vehicles, social media, influencers, smartphones, e-scooters, online shopping, food delivery apps. These are all things that many of us are using now, and we weren't even on our radar a few years ago. Add to that COVID-19, and we can see how impossible it is to predict exactly how things will affect the way that we live. Really, the only certainty we have is that we're changing faster than ever before, and that our communities will always be adapting. Historical practices have had us plan carefully and stick to a plan. This approach has served us really well in the past, but it's also based on assumptions that the future is singular and predictable. We assume that we think our future is, in fact, what we're thinking now is going to come true. This approach made a lot of sense when we could be fairly confident in our predictions. Now, with change happening all the time and that rapid pace of change, having a series of steps that are set in stone isn't necessarily going to get us where we need to go. This means we still need to develop visionary plans that identify where it is we want to go, but we also need to create plans that position us to be quick to adapt as we navigate the changes our world is going to throw our way. That includes the ones that we don't even know about yet. It will be about embracing what we do know and identifying together where we want to go, while expecting that we're going to be adapting as we get there. That makes the Nanaimo City Park a really exciting process. It's where we all get to talk about the desired destination, the future Nanaimo that this community and the people who live in it really want to create. really means that engagement is at the very core of what we're doing here. The Nanaimo City Spark is about our people today, but also about the people who are yet to come. It's going to be about the young people that are going to grow up in our community. It's going to be the people that live their golden years here. It's about all the people who make up Nanaimo. Everyone has a voice in this process and in planning our city. The Community Engagement Task Force highlighted that engagement needs to be much more than just a step in the process. It needs to be authentic and meaningful so people can see how their participation affects the decisions that are made in their community. It also highlighted that engagement needs to be equitable and inclusive. Through this process, we want to reach people in the community who may not have engaged in a planning process in the past and break down barriers that have limited their participation. To do this, we'll need to work closely with groups and organizations who have established relationships with harder to reach community members and work with them to design engagement opportunities that overcome these barriers. It really does take everyone to successfully build and shape the city. The overall process for Nanaimo City Spark is somewhat like a target. The process starts with really big thinking and will become more and more focused in each step of the journey. We start broadly at the gathering ideas phase and become more technical and detailed as we explore options, investigate trade-offs, and eventually define and refine the guiding plans that are going to be the summation of this process. The first phase, which is where we are now in that outer ring, is so critical because it really is intended to be accessible and fun and easy for everyone to be involved. Regardless of your age, your time constraints, or your experience in planning, everyone has an idea to contribute, and so we want to hear about it. We also want people to join us now at the start of this journey so that they stay invested and continue to grow and learn with us as we go through it. Engagement for the Nanaimo City Spark really will be a journey. That's one that we're adapting and improving as we learn. Now, this initial engagement phase is really focused heavily upon listening and sharing. Not only is it important for the project team and council to hear what people are saying, but we also want them to hear what each other is saying. The Nanaimo City Spark is about realizing that we're all in this together, and even though we might not always agree, our diversity and passions are what are needed to build a healthy and prosperous future for the city. Part of the entire journey will be reflecting on the process and identifying gaps in participation and making adjustments to the course as needed so that we can provide ample and equal opportunities for everyone. As we get further along in the journey, engagement will delve more deeply into complex ideas and options for achieving desired outcomes that the community has established together. This exploration will refine and focus directions and ultimately create plans that the community has invested in to take Nanaimo towards the future, and public engagement will be part of each step of the journey. Looking at what this looks like on a timeline, there's essentially three phases. The first phase, where we are now, is really focused on gathering ideas and priorities and figuring out what's important in the community. Phase 2 is the exploration of options, and Phase 3 is the development, review, and refinement of the plan. In order to be successful, the Nanaimo City Spark will need council's involvement. This process seeks to involve council in every step of the way and provide you with the information needed in order to speak about the project and really encourage the community to participate. The major activity we did want to highlight in the process is in the exploring option shred of plans for the start of Phase 2 once we've gathered additional input from the community. This charrette would bring together the project team, city staff, mayor, and council to really explore scenarios and trade-offs and how Nanaimo can advance towards vision and how to engage people on the options going forward. The Nanaimo City Spark is really about making choices together. Engagement levels for the process will range between informing all the way up to collaborating on the spectrum of engagement, depending on where we are in the process and the activity that we're doing. The intent is for this process to be a true collaboration. So this is one where people need to work together to successfully build and shape the city. So now that I've emphasized that engagement is at the heart of the process, one of the questions we've been wrestling with over the past few weeks is really how can we have a successful engagement during these unprecedented times? Certainly engagement is going to need to look a little bit different than it has in the past. We've been through many discussions about weighing the pros and cons, moving forward as well as waiting. Ultimately, what we've concluded is there really is no one right answer, so there are opportunities to adapt. Because the Nanaimo City Spark is in its infancy, we have a great opportunity to evolve our engagement. We have some flexibility at this early stage to try new things and be creative and see what works as well as what doesn't, and adapt our approaches to see what we learn. Recent health information suggests that we're not going back to the old normal anytime soon, so we're going to be adjusting to this new normal for quite some time. And though we can't predict exactly what's going to happen, planning a flexible path forward allows us to continue on with this important process. So that means we've been working on planning how we can successfully engage while respecting physical distancing measures. We want to take advantage of the fact that people are starting to interact again safely, while still following the physical distancing guidelines that we expect to be part of our lives for quite some time. When we look at what this means, the big thing that we want to make sure is that regardless of how we engage, the aims and objectives that were originally set out for the engagement program stay the same. We need a robust process that gets people excited in the Nanaimo City Park and is inclusive to everyone who lives here. We need to communicate clearly, allow for back and forth exchanges, and share everything we learn so that people can see the diversity of opinions out there. Ultimately, our engagement aims stay the same. We need to find a process that suits them. Our audiences also stay the same. There are many individuals and groups and organizations and interests that need to be involved in city planning processes. It will be important for us to connect with all of the groups, regardless of the methods that we use. Shifting our engagement does not shift who we engage, just how we engage with them at this time. Because our audience is so diverse, when we started this process, we developed a draft engagement plan that focused on diversity of opportunity, finding ways to engage digitally, in person, and through print media, recognizing that not everybody connects in the same way. Our goal is to leverage a broad range of opportunities available and spread word about Nanaimo City Park far and wide. As we look to adapt the engagement, the tools we've identified remain valid, but we start to shift more slightly to the digital realm, recognizing that there still will be roles to play for print tools, and a lot of importance behind the role of using word of mouth and people to encourage the conversation. Our audiences are diverse, but we still need to connect with them in diverse ways. To do this, outreach is fundamental and a big part of this initial first phase. We can create great information, but it only does good if people can find it and use it. We want to create awareness and excitement. Early engagement is the time in the project where outreach is paramount. This is when we get to tap into our networks and find the hooks that are going to draw people into the Nanaimo City Park. Part of the outreach is brand recognition, so it really is like advertising. A brand has been developed for Nanaimo City Park, and through outreach and engagement, we're going to be looking for ways to continually use this brand so people recognize it and understand what it means. Our ideal is going to be able to ask anyone in Nanaimo if they know what Nanaimo City Park is and have them answer yes. And if they answer no, then we need to have the tools and information to share with them. So our outreach tools can be placed into three categories. The first are our digital tools. These are a fantastic way to raise broad awareness and extend our reach. Fortunately, earlier this year, Nanaimo set up Get Involved in Nanaimo, which involves a ton of opportunities for productive online engagement and can really facilitate two-way conversations and sharing opportunities that can be difficult to achieve in other online platforms. We'll be able to capitalize on the city's social media presence, and we'll be encouraging others to use their social networks to extend information far out to the community. We also have opportunities to get a little creative through using platforms like video and photo contests, things that will support people interacting. Of course, not everybody interacts online, and in time of physical distancing, this means we need to be really thoughtful about where and how we use print media and how we might collect information feedback from people in writing or by phone, or for means that extend beyond the digital realm. We see a lot of opportunities still for printing materials, leveraging locations that are open and frequented by people in the community, and getting information out through newspapers and mail-outs. And the final, and what I think is probably the most important part, will be people and word of mouth. Our project team is relatively small, but what we want to do is be able to expand our reach and expand our networks by connecting with other messengers in our community and getting them excited about the Nanaimo City Park, so our reach can extend that much further. Many times, when you think about getting involved in something, it's a neighbor or a friend or a service provider, somebody that you trust that recommends it and invites you into that process. This means it's really important for us to call on community leaders and friends and organizers to be the messengers to share guidance on how we can best connect with people in this network and in their networks and help spread that word. Mayor and council will be powerful voices for Nanaimo City Spark, staying actively involved in helping people understand why their participation is so important. We'll prepare resources like FAQs, information, and handouts so that we can arm our community messengers with the information to take out to their networks. Ultimately, outreach can take a lot of effort, and a small amount of time from a large number of people can really make a huge difference in participation. So we want to plan and try as many avenues as we can and listen carefully to ideas that might help us reach a little bit further. So once we've told people about what's happening, we need to provide ways for them to contribute. The first phase is really focused on asking and listening and learning and being open and curious to what's on people's mind when it comes to their city. Early on when we started planning Nanaimo City Spark, a goal was to provide many different ways to participate, recognizing that some community members are going to have lots of time and lots of ideas and they're going to be keen to engage deeply and frequently. Others will only be able to provide a small amount of their time and add a few thoughts. Some people are going to be really excited to be involved, others might be hesitant or unsure about participating, and so we want to hear all of these voices. So our goal is to create a variety of spaces and ways that people can contribute in different, however and wherever they're available. So part of these activities included in-person engagement. What we've gone through is an exercise of shifting our engagement to maintain the original intent, but find ways that we can deliver activities safely. A key part of the process will be Get Involved Nanaimo, the city's digital engagement platform, which really is intended to provide participants a safe place to engage online. It's going to be an opportunity to work with a really wide range of tools the platform offers, and include things like storytelling, community mapping, forums, and really opportunities to see what others are saying and facilitate 2 or 3 or 4-way exchanges so the information's there and is more interactive than traditional tools. Social media and video will also support and are intended to drive people to the Get Involved platform. These tools are meant to be fun and engaging, reaching a really broad audience and sparking interest so people can want to get involved. A big part of capturing initial input will be through a mail-out survey and community questionnaire. We are planning a statistically valid mail-out survey that will go to a representative sample of the community and gather early input on key questions. But because not everyone is able to participate in a mail-out, an accompanying community survey would also be developed and open to anybody who wants to participate. When we started planning, we've been looking at doing a series of community pop-ups. Really, the intent was meeting people where they are. Since we are looking at a scenario where people are has changed, we need to look at a modified version of pop-ups that still provide these fun and awareness-building engagement opportunities, but do it in a slightly different way. So some of our working plans include developing at-home activities, challenges that keep people to develop and submit ideas, arranging information drops and pickups to people who might not have online access, capturing and recording ideas regularly so people can see what's new and what's being heard, and where possible, potentially hosting some pop-ups that follow current guidelines, depending on where we are. One of the more challenging changes that we needed to shift was the idea of having community events that were intended to bring people together. Because we're anticipating that large gatherings are unlikely in the near future, we're looking to find interactive online opportunities through things like ask and answer series where people can submit questions and have them answered, coffee calls or chats, through online platforms, some videos that feature speakers that share information, and interactive content posted through Get Involved. This one really is our most challenging limitation, and we'll need to be creative and explore and find out what works well for the community. One of the original ideas was also to have static input stations throughout the community and recreation destinations and places that where people are going to be, and they can just write a comment or share some information as they pass by. We're going to continue to pursue this idea safely and using things like potential stations at outdoor locations, public drop boxes, or other options that can limit the physical contact. Stakeholder meetings and interviews were a very important part of the original plan and will continue to be so. Really what we want to do is get targeted information from key groups. So it's anticipated that these processes will carry forward through online meetings, phone calls, email correspondence to make sure those voices are involved. And finally, we've always been planning to develop community ambassador kits that really provide information to the messengers in the community that they need in order to talk about the project. And we're still planning to do these kits, just possibly using more digital sharing materials and activities that happen from a distance. So together, we anticipate that these activities will provide a positive and interactive setting for the phase 1 engagement. We're going to need to continue to monitor changes and guidelines and adapt phase 2 and 3 engagement accordingly as well. Our schedule currently shows us working on phase 1 engagement through the summer, and we think it will be important to listen and adapt as we engage at a really uncertain time. A willingness to check in on our process and make changes to fit current circumstances will be important. Ultimately, there are changes ahead, and it's going to be a challenging time for us to complete an engagement process. We don't know what exactly is going to happen in the coming future, and I think it becomes more clear that it's going to be difficult to predict. I think it is going to be really interesting, and one of the things we'll hear a lot about is how we've changed from COVID-19, how we relate differently to one another, and how our community, what it means for our community, and what that might mean in terms of how we plan for the future. Ultimately, we don't know the answer, but I think it will become an important part of the discussion, just as communities all around the globe are tackling the same questions. So we have a lot to learn for our future in Nanaimo, and Nanaimo City Park is a chance not only to start planning for that future, but also a great opportunity, basically, to reconnect for the good of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm open to questions, I would think, from council members. Comments? Silence is not golden.
Can I break the silence?
Go ahead, Councillor Marvin.
Actually, I'd just like to move option 1. That council received the report titled City Spark Public Engagement Strategy.
I don't have a mic anymore.
I can hear you, Cheryl.
I've had questions, but it's not showing up, and I don't have a hand anymore in my Zoom.
We'll give it a second, Councillor Armstrong.
Ask Janet to stop sharing the screen. Ask Janet to stop sharing the screen.
Yes, Jane, if you can stop sharing this screen, where I think we're getting close. There we are. I think I'll let Councillor Armstrong ask her question first, Councillor Marvin. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
One of the concerns I have is where it says that the community will make decisions. I think that's very misleading, because it's not the committee that will make the community, it will be council. Where it says, it almost leaves you with the feeling that council will abide by the community's thoughts, which doesn't always happen. And I'm just concerned about that. Because, for instance, if we did that, we wouldn't have any bike lanes in the city, because the majority don't want them. And we all know that we do need to start building them. So that is a concern I raise.
Councillor Marvin?
I'm confused, Councillor Armstrong. Are you saying in the motion that, because it doesn't state anything like that in the motion?
No, I'm not talking about the motion. I was trying to speak before we got to the motion. What I'm concerned about is where they show the engagement process, and it shows the community will have the final say. That's not accurate. It's council that has the final say.
Can you say where that's stated?
It's when you go to start with the process of engagement, and it's in the green part.
Ms. Bopal Singh has something to say.
Hi, through the chair, Councillor Armstrong, I think you're referring to one of the slides that Jana showed about the IAP participation process. And it's probably a little bit hard to see, but there's 5 different stages of engagement, and we've identified that we're going up to collaborate, and that the final decision, which is in power in that theory of engagement, rests with council as the elected body. So we've tried to make that clear in both the engagement reports. So I'm not sure if you're able to take a look at that. Jan, are you able to put that slide back up on the screen?
If you don't lead the revolution, Councillor Armstrong, maybe no one will notice.
Well, the reason I bring it forward is being brought forward to me by citizens and saying, oh, so citizens will have a common thing, which is not accurate.
Please, through the chair, I can share that screen if that's helpful.
Where it's under power, it says, to place the final decision-making in the hands of the public. The city of Nanaimo will implement what the public decides.
Through the
And
chair.
that is not accurate,
Okay.
in my opinion.
Ms. Gopal Singh.
Councillor Armstrong, I'm realizing perhaps what's not clear is there's a dotted line that goes from the inform on the left-hand side of the screen to collaborate, and that's the portion of engagement, and it's intended to show that the blue is where council holds the ultimate decision based on the inform, consult, involve, and collaborative forms of engagement. So what we tried to do is take, I guess, the recommendations of the Community Engagement Task Force, which talked about being clear about what we're engaging and which level, and we've tried to identify it here. So the intent is very much that the empower and the blue section is in council's hand.
I must caution you all perhaps to try and mute as you're having conversations. I know Councillors Armstrong and Brown are in the same room, and that is presenting some issues. Ms. Robertson has been waving her hand to get my attention on that issue. I think, Councillor Armstrong, with respect, I understand your point, but I don't know that it's a serious issue given the nature of the explanation that Ms. Gopal Singh has provided.
Yeah, like I say, the only reason I raise it is that many people feel that they will have the final say the way it's written. I would prefer it to say that council will take upon advisement the results of whatever, but that's fine.
Council will consider, perhaps, might be a way of putting it. I'm going to go to Councillors Thorpe, Hemmons, and Turley. I think that's the correct order. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, a couple of comments. I'll be honest and say that at first I was hesitant about this process. I wasn't overly enthused about the name, to be honest, but I've gotten past that, and now I quite like it, and I'm impressed with the work that's been done that I read in the report. My hesitations up until today have centered around the timing of this and whether the public will see this process as a priority, considering that everyone is very concerned about the economic fallout right now of the COVID situation. And secondly, the concerns of the constraints around in-person engagement. And to me, that's a very important component. So I really hope that is addressed, and I'm hearing that it will be. So having read the document and heard the presentation from Ms. Linsky, I'm much more enthused about this now. I think it certainly makes sense to combine our efforts to deal with 6 very important city plans and approach that with an integrated process. So I look forward in seeing how this rolls out, and hopefully we'll get good response from the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 3 questions for Janet and then 3 questions for staff. So I'll take your lead on when I should ask staff the questions. But Janet, thank you very much for the presentation. A couple of things. The OCP, the last one that was written in 2008, had some great ideas that people obviously are still married to. So in your process of figuring out how we're going to go about asking people questions about the city, are we considering what was embedded in the last OCP, what worked really well, what did we perhaps not meet our targets on but are still good ideas?
Through the chair, thank you. That is a really great question. And early on when we were talking about this process with staff, it was clear that everybody agrees that the original OCP in 2010 did have a lot of great ideas, and the intent has always been to build on that and refine based on where we are today, but definitely carried a lot of those ideas forward. So one of the things that we're working on right now alongside the public engagement is reviewing all of those technical documents, assessing what's been done in the OCP, and doing a technical review of the policies that we think need to move forward and make sense. one of the challenges with engagement is finding the right balance between recognizing all of the great technical components and then engaging with people at the levels that they feel comfortable with. And so we will be looking to bring in a lot of that information, but also being sensitive that we don't want to overwhelm.
Thank you. I'm thinking of those people who know the OCP inside and out, those people who really follow what we do and are really passionate. And I want to make sure that we're not, when they see what we're doing or trying to do, what was good about the old OCP isn't lost. And they can then make a connection to say, oh, we looked at that last time and it didn't work for a host of reasons. That's why we're dropping it this time. Or that's why we're putting, we think it's a great idea. We're going to continue to do. So as long as there's, for me, a direct link between the 2008 OCP and what we're trying to do now, what we're letting go of, what we're building, that would be helpful for me, and I think for a lot of our residents. My second question, I realize I have 4 questions for staff, so again, Mr. Mayor, I'll take your lead on that. But my last one to you is that if we decide to go with, we're going to continue to engage, but we're not able to hold large events. And as Councillor Thorpe said, and I couldn't agree more, engagement, for me, a core component really is about relationship, right? And that really only happens face to face. So if we're not able to collect the data that we had hoped, or it's not the richest data set that we imagined we could have, are we willing, or is it possible then to hold off until we can have larger gatherings? Like, is there a potential for extending this project until we can really gather those perspectives in person?
Through the chair, I wonder if staff might be the best one to answer that one.
So my response to that, through the chair, is that council is ultimately the steering committee of this project. We've gone from GPCs to now special council meetings where you consider this. And so at every step of the way, should you direct us to proceed, we would be checking in with you to see how we need to adapt. As we know, the situation with COVID through our provincial and federal guidance changes sometimes daily. And one of the things that we've worked with Lanark to do is to look at a process that can go back and forth with the interplay of our ability to change social or physical distancing requirements. So it's a new era for us, and this started off being a really innovative project by combining the engagement the way we were doing it, and then we've had to innovate again, and we'll have to continue doing that throughout. So I'd say ultimately we'll come back to you as the steering committee of this project as to how you want to either extend it, maybe put pauses on different parts. So, and we would be coming back to you with our recommendations, and ultimately give us guidance from there.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor, I'll get back in the queue for staff questions, if that's okay with you.
We got lots of little hands up today. Before I go any further, though, Ms. Robertson, is the hand next to Ms. Evans' name indicate she wants to respond to one of the questions? Ms. Evans?
Oh, hi, through the chair. Apologies, I had raised my hand there a little bit earlier, but I suppose as a very brief point, just to reiterate, Jen and Lisa, one of the discussions that we had as far as timeline and when to go out was, if we take an opportunity to begin the launch now, it gives us some opportunity to extend phase 1 into the fall. Whereas one of our considerations is if we wait and the circumstances for physical distancing or other opportunities have not changed, or perhaps even a second wave of tightening, and then perhaps we are more better positioned in order to try and take advantage of this first opportunity. And then, as Councillor Hemmons asked, if we don't feel that what we've got back, our ability to engage through our outreach platforms has not reached the point that we were hoping for, we do have the ability to kind of extend upon that through the fall.
If I can exercise the privilege of chair and jump in, these are unusual times. We will have to adapt the process. This may be a very long summer of discontent depending on what happens around provincial rules, how COVID plays out. The fall will be entirely different, potentially so will the winter and the spring. So I think what I'm hearing from the experts we've hired is that, and from Ms. Bopel Singh and others, is that there's a an acknowledgement of a need to be adaptable, and hard and fast rules just don't work anymore. Having said that, I know you're all anxious to comment, so I can see your little hands, so let's just go through this. It will be Councillor Turley next, then Councillor Gesselbrock, then Councillor Brown. Councillor Turley,
Thank you,
please.
Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's a great way of doing more than one plan at a time, which I'm all over efficiency. I had Councillor Armstrong's concerns with regard to the empowering when I first read it, and then I kind of thought about it for a while, and then I read the bottom right-hand blue box under examples where it says alternate approval process, referendum and election, and that kind of made it all clear for me that while council does have the ultimate authority on this, the citizens in Nanaimo, if they disagree in a majority, with regard to what they think, and the results will show the polls. So I understand what Ireland is now. So thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Bonner, I recognize you'll come after Councillor Brown. So Councillor Gesselbrock, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm struggling here with poor connectivity of internet. Power's been on and off, and my
We're struggling a bit with the fact your head is turned on its side.
Okay.
Yes, he's got power problems.
How's that?
No, you're still there.
That's better, thank you. Less disconcerting, easier to follow you.
You learned anything right, though.
Comms are down here. Comms are down. Okay. First off, I just want to thank all the work that's gone into this. I like how the engagement is laid out. Things look very well thought out. We definitely have issues with having to be adaptable around COVID, and I got two questions. The first one is what would be the latest date that we could postpone starting this process with making sure that we get done this process before this council's term is up?
Through the chair, I can take a first attempt at it and then maybe pass it on to Lisa. So the schedule that we've set up so far would have us starting in June with engagement, and phase one essentially going through June and into the fall. Phase two is right now scheduled for fall 2020, and then phase three would be spring, summer 2021. So there is a little bit of flexibility at the end. One of the risks of pushing engagement too far off is that we probably are looking at an 18-month process overall, and it might be difficult, and it gives us a lot less buffer the further that we push it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think given the unpredictability of how everything is going to roll out with COVID, my take is to just get on with it and keep rolling with the punches. Nothing's going to be perfect. The last point that I want to make is since the last presentation, I haven't been quite clear sort of when we've approved to go on, and engagement is a really important piece, and one aspect that it just hasn't sit well right, and it's not the most easiest thing giving feedback on this, but I find that the name City Spark is very confusing, and I like the vibe with it and that, but I think I got attached to OCP Plus. I think it really clearly said what we're doing, and with the addition of these other plans, and I think it's really important to educate. Most people don't even know what an official community plan is, and it's much more direct marketing and linkage to it. And I think City Spark, if I wasn't involved as a councillor and if I saw it, I wouldn't make the link, and it'd be harder entry into it. And so I don't know if we've gone too far down the rabbit hole on the marketing and the name of this, but I would really like some serious reconsideration of what we're going to call it. I just think that for something that's important, that the name is really going to make a difference, and I can't get past it. So that's my commentary. Thank you.
A rose is still a rose by any other name, Councillor. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I have a question, but I also have a comment. It is around that, and I actually had crafted a motion, potentially in follow-up, based on just a brief email exchange with Mr. Rudolph about changing the branding. I just don't think Spark hits the mark, and I agree with Councillor Gessbrock. It was difficult to have that conversation early on, and you know, I can see it sort of taking life, and I agree, you know, trying to explain what a community plan is, what a zoning bylaw is, and now layering on a naming convention that I actually don't think really relates to anything. You're having to do too much explaining, and I think it's been over-designed a little bit. But my question, so I would be following your worship's advice on when to put that motion forward, but my question for Jana is, thanks for the presentation. I really appreciate the way it's been laid out. Section 3.2 sort of speaks to reaching out and trying to make this an inclusive process and capture voices that might not typically be heard. I'm just wondering if you can expand a little bit on that paragraph. It says that will happen. I'm just wondering what sort of strategies can be utilized to, especially now where we might have large segments of the population that are still choosing to isolate due to underlying conditions, or you know, they might be of a certain age or they're at higher risk. So this sort of paragraph and section became all the more important as I read it in our new paradigm, and I'm wondering how we might, how you and the rest of the team might achieve this level of engagement that makes sure those voices are heard.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, I think that is a fundamental project question, and one that we've been talking about. And I think our approach is to do everything we can to engage with networks and listen carefully, and always ask when we're reaching out to stakeholders and to organizations that represent others in the community about how they will recommend us to engage with people that we might have previously not been able to engage with, and being able to adapt our materials into those various platforms. So one example would be able to reach out to an organization that represents groups that may not be online, and have discussions with them about how we can give information to them, deal with challenges with how we share the information and get feedback, and be able to incorporate their participation in a way that works better with them. Part of it is going into it understanding that we don't necessarily know all of the barriers to engagement as we're going in, and so we want to explore with our stakeholders and organizations some of the ways that we can start breaking those down and do a better job than we have in the past of reaching out to them. I think I probably missed some key things. Kate, if there's anything else to add, maybe I'll ask you to comment.
I think you captured most of it, but I suppose just to give a couple of examples, Councillor Brown, we're thinking of people who work directly with youth or client groups through Violent Health. Those people are considered to be essential services and are still meeting with those clients, although less clients during the day. And so part of our thought here is, instead of assuming how we get to those people, is to work with those workers that are in contact with those people on a weekly basis, just as one example, to understand, as Jen mentioned, what's the best way to get input from them. And so we kind of have a list of groups that tend to be a little bit underrepresented in a planning process like this. And so that's one of our core aims, is to look at those audiences and really leverage those existing trusted relationships, because even if we are fantastic and the staff involved in this is fantastic, it's those existing relationships and trust that is really going to enable us to get to those harder to reach.
Thank you. If I may, just a quick follow-up. How will we measure success in terms of that engagement? So we make this effort, what is sort of the metrics we'll look at and say, hey, we've been successful, or hey, we didn't quite get there, and now we need to redouble those efforts.
Yeah, that's okay. Sorry, through the chair. Oh, Jana, were you going to speak? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Through the chair, I think there's a couple of things in order to measure that. One key piece to relate back to, aside from the targeted drop-offs and efforts that we're going to go about, is relating back to the overall community survey, which is designed to be statistically valid and representative across groups, neighborhood areas, genders, etc. And I think that will be one of our key, more robust quantitative measures of how we're reaching groups, and then supplemented by the targeted points to try and fill out areas that may be challenged otherwise.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Gopal Singh.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Brown, we also have the benefit of several committees that Council has, the Environment Committee and also the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness that we've given a presentation to already. And particularly that latter group in terms of inclusiveness, checking in with them on how we move forward with implementing engagement will be quite critical. So for example, if there's recommendations for us to take on things like having somebody sign, for example, to make things more accessible for some of our community members, things like that. But without, again, as Jana Zielinski said, presuming, it's asking what is the best way from those who are either facing challenges or working with those who are. And so I think some of you who've been involved in some of the design labs that got interrupted through the systems mapping Health Housing Task Force, through that work we have an opportunity to pick that up and work with different groups, whether it's youth, whether it's people who work with our urban indigenous community, and co-design that rather than assume or impose that we know the best way of engaging. So we will be evolving that as we go, and that's an important piece. And those two committees do provide us with an important forum for that check-in. Thank you.
Councillor Brown, I'm going to ask you to hold off on your motion for a few minutes till we've got through most of the council. It's Councillor Bonner next, then back to Councillor Martman, Councillor Hemmons, and Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mostly the question, well, I say one little quick question. On page 31 of the presentation, it talks about small group meetings and moving away from that in your tweak. But I'm wondering if we can still have small group meetings. We're about to have one later this afternoon. And if you wanted to get into, say, 49 people, or keep it below the 50 mark, have you considered the idea of tickets for events? Whereas, and that way, a person would have to actually not necessarily purchase, or would have to actually reserve a seat and take the time out to do that instead of just showing up at an event that they heard about 10 minutes earlier or something like that.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Bonner. Those are both excellent comments. And interestingly enough, we did develop this presentation a couple weeks ago where physical distancing was a lot more limited. And so one of the things that we're seeing is keeping our eyes open for opportunities as they emerge and guidelines change. And so I think being flexible and saying, our original plan was to have small group meetings. If physical distancing guidelines say that that's okay, part of our process would be talking with the groups who would be involved to understand if they feel safe in that setting or what their preferences are, and facilitating in a way that works best for them. The ticket idea is a new one. We hadn't thought about that, and so I think that we should be adding that to our arsenal of potentially evolutionary ideas as we're going forward, and we continue to monitor what the changes are going to be.
Okay, thank you. And Worship, if I may, just one more. It's talking about the whole concept of City Spark. And is the public going to recognize it as a vehicle for engaging on these topics? Like we have 6, I believe, that we're looking at. Some of those topics could be started right away, but as an example, the economic development plan, that won't be, I don't think that'll be started until we actually come up with a strategy, which is still in the works with the task force, with the committee there. So I'm wondering, is the public going to recognize City Spark as a way of engaging council in general, or is it only going to be for these specific 6, and then once they're done, we toss City Sparks to the, to where we don't need it anymore? Or will City Sparks continue to be a vehicle recognized by the public as a way of engaging on topics as they come available?
Through the chair, I will provide a response, and I'll potentially ask staff to do the same. When we started working on this process, it was our understanding that City Spark would be basically the umbrella that encompasses the engagement that's going on for all of these processes and gives it a home and an identity behind it. We have had some probing discussions internally about what does this mean to City Spark now? Is that going to be a brand that is on the OCP? Is it going to be part of these other documents? Is it going to have life beyond that? And I don't think we have an answer to that yet, but an interesting opportunity, I think, to see how people interact with it and how it becomes part of the city's language. We looked back at some of the plans that had been done for the previous OCP and the sign and IMO and the language that we used about that, and understand those really did resonate with people. And so we need to gauge and understand, I think, to see if it does carry on beyond the process that we're talking about here, but the original intent was it to be this all-encompassing engagement piece that brings these plans together.
Ms. Gopal Singh.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, you're aware that we have the Get Involved in Nanaimo, which is the vehicle and the online platform that City Spark will be using. And that platform, and maybe I can also, as needed, look to Ms. Peroki to make sure I'm saying this correctly, that platform is the main engagement tool for all matters related to council, including City Spark. So the one benefit of Get Involved being launched this year is that it's an important tool that we have for the engagement for City Spark. And so that piece, that platform, is an ongoing, sustained process that goes well beyond City Spark, but supports that engagement process. I think that would be, I'm looking to Ms. Peroki for a nod there, yes? And through the chair, if I could speak briefly to the branding. You are our steering committee. And so ultimately, what this plan is called is up to you. And the other thing I would add is no matter the, tagline or brand, City Spark or something else, there would be wording that goes with it. Jana, help me out, like what you have, that explains more of what a brand is. Whether it's that brand or another one, there would be an explanation that would go with it that our consultants would be helping us do as part of the engagement. But just a reminder that ultimately one of the reasons we are coming to you is that you are ultimately the steering committee on this project.
Councillor Marvin.
Thank you. I think what I will do is wait until Councillor Brown, I believe, is bringing forward, because it's questions I have around that.
All right. Councillor Hemmons and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. That was a good segue, Ms. Gopal saying to get involved. My recollection of when we launched that program, it has some glitches, and this will be our first opportunity to really engage with it. So are we sure that those glitches are worked out? If it's going to form the basis of a huge part of our engagement?
That's a very good, through the chair. That's a very good question. Perhaps I'll ask Ms. Peroki. As far as I know, it is ready for us to use, but I'll turn over to her as the expert on this one.
Ms. Peroki.
Thank you, Your Worship. The chair to Councillor Hemmons, we, pre-COVID, I think it was about 2 weeks, we did a soft launch with the community so that they could familiarize themselves with the various tools we have, the different kinds of that help us with the different types of engagement, whether it's doing a survey, telling a story, or presenting an idea through like the ideas feature. And so it's been working, but things had to be put on pause with us pushing the engagement platform and asking people to register because of COVID. So whenever council decides to move forward with these strategic plans, we will be working with Lanark and others and to really ramp up the registration for Get Involved in Nanaimo. And in the meantime, as there are other departments that are looking at bringing forward their engagement opportunities for their potential projects, this platform will be used for them as well. So whether it's engineering and public works, or finance department, or even community planning through some of the other areas that they're looking at engaging with the public, this platform is going to be used in one way or another. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. And I want to weigh into an earlier conversation, if I may, and that City Spark was also not my favorite, and thank you, Ben, for opening this. This is a bit of an uncomfortable conversation, but OCP Plus just resonated with me. We got it. We knew what it was doing. And it's funny, it didn't immediately stand out to me, but then when I looked at it and I re-examined the branding, I think we could have something better. And I'm thinking of, we have, I think many of us are kind of interested in Nanaimo kind of being that city that we all kind of wanted to be, that people see its potential, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking of Corey Landel's Nanaimo branding that people really attach to. And I'm not saying that, but just something like that. So a name that we all immediately get, and an image that just makes sense that we're talking about our town, rather than a generic something. So just reaffirming my colleague's opinion in that, I would support a re-examination of that. And now, I actually have 3 questions from a resident, which I'm going to deliver because the question period not being open right now, and also because I agree with them. Now,
can you be very quick, Councillor Hemmons? I'm just looking at the time. I'm wondering if you could be fairly quick with those 3 questions.
I'm going to do my best, Leonard, but they're important questions. So the first question is attachment B in our terms of reference identifies, guidance principles letter C is acknowledge and address the priorities of climate change, truth and reconciliation, and sustainable service delivery. Now, this resident, I think, wisely pointed out that those guiding principles are not documented anywhere in our strategic plan or any sort of visioning document. So trying to figure out where those came from and how they can link back to what Council's trying to do and our priorities. So I'll leave it, that'll be my first question, if perhaps Ms. Wolfelsing can address that. Where did those 3 priorities come from?
So through the chair, you're speaking about the guiding principles that are in the terms of reference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so climate action, truth and reconciliation, and I'm sorry, I'm moving furiously between screens here. Acknowledge and address the priorities of climate change, truth and reconciliation, and sustainable service delivery. So where did those emerge from?
Those came back in September of 2019. I'm going to have to look back at one of the GPCs we had, and we staff ended up presenting guiding principles to council, of which one was added, I recall, about monitoring process and measure and track progress. And so that's on page 2 of the terms of reference. Those 3, there's actually more, but it's basically building on the success of existing policy documents. And then in that, it also refers back to council's strategic themes. And then C, acknowledging the priorities of climate change, truth, reconciliation, sustainable service delivery. That also came out of what has changed since the last OCP in terms of considerations that are important both for council and then also that we see emerging as themes in British Columbia. So I think I'm not reflecting the time frame, but I believe it was September 2019. I'll have to look back at one of the GPCs.
Okay, that actually helps. So these were identified by council, and don't worry about the timeline because it's foggy to me. But the sense is that these are emerging themes that have become paramount to the community. I don't know how we've identified that, perhaps just the council, in the time between the last OCP and now.
That's right. Things that need to be considered, particularly with climate change and adaptation, and emerging considerations that were not looked at when all of the 6 plans, or the ones that exist, were first created. Things that we need to look at as part of this process. And what we did is we came to council with some guiding principles for your endorsement. on the project. And that was at the time, I think, when council added an additional one on monitoring. So, yeah, to be accurate, I think council staff looked at what would have to happen, and indeed, why are we looking at updating OCP? What are the things that have shifted that require us not just as part of a best practice to look at it every 10 years? What are some key themes that need to be considered in this time?
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. The second question is related to that, and that is that those are council's guiding principles. Are we going to ask the community about, are we missing anything in our guiding principles of doing this?
Yes, I think that would come out of this very first stage of looking at asking the community what some of their key priorities are. And Jan, I don't know if you'd like to speak a little bit more to the openness of this broad first step of engaging with community.
Through the chair, yeah, I can add to that. So one of the things that we're working on right now are the questions for the questionnaire, and those are the types of things that we'll be wrestling with to say, do we bring forward these guiding principles that have already been developed and ask people to respond and reflect on those as part of this overall process, and that's an opportunity for us to connect and say, do we have the right list of principles, or do we need to make adjustments before we go forward?
Okay, so that's excellent, meaning that the guiding principles may change, the terms of reference may change based on the feedback we're getting.
Yeah, that is typically when you go into a process, you go into it pretty wide open because we need to listen before we can make decisions.
Okay, and final question, thank you very much for your patience. Is there going to be a comprehensive list available online of all of the other city documents that feed into the OCP process, or OCP Plus, or City Park, and how they all interact?
Through the chair, I'll tackle that one. The answer is yes, absolutely. And in fact, our consultants have got a slew of all those documents already that they've been going through, but the intent is very much to ideally graphically link them and have links to the actual documents. And that includes more recent studies as well as past documents. So not just the actual plans, but the things that have gone into shaping them. So, for example, a demographic study in the land inventory I just alluded to that we recently completed.
And the plan part for me, it's not so much these are the plans that exist and a list of them, but how they all interact, what feeds into what, and how we use our plans to make our decisions, etc. That seems like a comprehensive undertaking, but it would be valuable, and it might actually be part of what we're doing in terms of communicating to the public what the city does.
Through the chair, if I may. Thanks, Lisa. Yes, it is actually part of what we're doing, and you are right, it's an extremely complex undertaking, and so what we've been working on is a system that, we are reviewing and bringing things together that are in incredible detail to understand where things are, and then finding ways to have different layers of how we share this with the public so that we have the higher level that most people will engage with and want to hear about, more detailed level that people really want to get into and understand and get into that detail, and then the very, very deep detail that we're going to need in order to pull all of this together. So what we're trying to do is layer it in ways that make it accessible for the people that are going to be participating.
Thank you very much.
Before I get to the next speaker on the list, I'm going to suggest, unless I hear strong objection, that the item 4B, short-term solutions for cleanliness in public spaces, we will put over till tonight's public meeting at 7 o'clock, because it's clear we're scheduled to end here at 4 and then head down to Shaw. Those of us who can, we're not going to get through this item very quickly, and the same with correspondence and other issues. So not seeing or hearing any substantive objections, let me just throw this in while we're at it. I'm not that fond of the term city spark either, but if you're going to convince me, it better be Imagine Nanaimo again and leave it at that, which incorporates, I think, the best and first process we ever had, and mentions Nanaimo, which should keep everyone happy. Having said that, Councillor Gesselbrock, and then Councillor Martman, and then Councillor Brown again. So I have the list as I have it.
Thank you, Worship. I totally doubt this question right now. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to move the motion that council receive the report titled City Spark Public Engagement Strategy dated the 2020 May 25th and direct staff to proceed with the implementation of the proposed public engagement strategy.
I'm going to ask for a seconder. We'll have Councillor Hemmens, and then rather than get into discussion, if Councillor Brown wishes to make a motion around name change, now is the appropriate time to amend the motion that's on the floor. Certainly the way I see it, unless Ms. Robertson tells me I'm out of order.
Nope.
And she doesn't. So, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually going to seek a little bit of additional guidance on here because I don't see why we can't receive this report that's basically talking about the engagement strategy, and then maybe for a little cleaner discussion, have a subsequent motion around the name change. I just don't want to see us defeat an engagement strategy because we're debating the name.
All right, I am not seeing a bunch of hands fly up at that suggestion. Any further discussion on the motion as made by Councillor Martman, seconded by Councillor Hemmens? All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. Ms. Lenski, you've done well. You've got us through the first hurdle. Now if we can just get all the greyhounds to run together, we'll be fine. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I'll pass the motion and then quickly speak to it. That City Spark be renamed and that updated visual identity materials be presented to council.
Seconded by Councillor Armstrong.
Can I just add a question?
Councillor Martman.
And gee, real lesson learned here, because I'm gathering that most on council were not really in love with the Spark name, yet we passed it as a council. And really, if we weren't comfortable with it then, we probably should have spoken up. But if we've got the opportunity to rebrand, I'm just wondering what costs have already gone into City Spark and how much materials have we already got branded?
And if I can ask one further question for Ms. Gopal Singh, who's going to answer all of them, and how much will this delay the start of the process, Ms. Gopal Singh?
That was actually something I guess it depends how quickly an alternative that is acceptable can be done. And I think in terms of what's been spent today, Ms. Faruqi, I think that's 5 to 10,000 has been spent on the branding. The key part about the branding from Lanark's point of view is, and from our point of view, is having something ready to roll out in terms of the web pages, the technical documents, all the stuff that goes out to community. So if council has, so that's definitely would be a delay. We were hoping if council endorsed this plan that we would go for a launch on June 15th with a variety of materials produced for the engagement. So that, I guess, could be pushed, would have to be pushed out.
May I ask one further question?
Councillor Martman and then Councillor Brown.
And in view of timing and cost, so 5 to 10,000 is a chunk, but I don't think people are envisioning, I think Councillor Brown is correct, that Spark doesn't say get involved, it doesn't say this is planning, it doesn't say, and so I'm thinking that rather than having to create a new brand, that we use a brand we already have, and council would have to choose between, like, there was Plan Nanaimo, Imagine Nanaimo. We have things, I think, that are already there and ready to go, so that's what I have to suggest.
I'm hoping Councillor Martin was seconding Imagine Nanaimo again, but I'm not sure I heard that. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just to back you up on that, I absolutely love Imagine Nanaimo. I think it's a great name and speaks to all the things that a project like this should take. But I think OCP Plus is a great. I sort of left it open here, but I would happily amend my motion for Imagine Nanaimo, but a couple things stood out to me. One is Jana spoke to brand recognition, and I just really think City Spark, it creates another layer of trying to communicate things, and that it's confusing already when you talk about OCP plus 5 other documents, what they all mean, how they link together. I think City Spark just introduces a confusing element to that. And further, Ms. Bolstein's comments around that there will be a little blurb that sort of explains what it is. Well, I think at the end of the day, effective branding should have as minimal amount of explanation needed to help explain it. So the motion as is right now doesn't contain the name, but it's someone which I think there's a couple great candidates, one being OCP Plus, the working title that I think really stuck and made a lot of sense from a practical perspective. I think I love Imagine Nanaimo, and I agree. I think that the color schemes and all that things work. I don't think it would be a huge undertaking to modify some of those materials to just update the name. Hopefully with a slightly different fonts. It's a little easier to read.
Thank you. I have Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Thorpe, I believe. Yes, please. Councillor Armstrong.
Sorry, the mic wasn't unmuted. Well, as everybody knows, I was against City Spark from day one, and the feedback on Facebook has not been good towards that name either. So I think either OCP Plus or Imagine Nanaimo is much better because, the first thing in communications is you want to know what everybody names speaks to what you're talking about. So I think OCP Plus is great, or we could do Imagine Nanaimo and OCP Plus together or whatever, but I'm all for changing
the amendment.
Just so we're clear, I'm not saying Imagine Nanaimo, I'm saying Imagine Nanaimo again. Councillor Thorpe.
2.0. 2.0, yeah.
Councillor Thorpe, please.
Imagine Nanaimo 2.0.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with a lot of the points that have been made, and I think my first comment earlier today, this afternoon, was that I wasn't originally sold on the name. And I think when we first heard it at that earlier meeting, quite frankly, we were all being very polite because we recognized the work that staff had put into that point in this project, which in itself is a very worthwhile project, of course. But I didn't sense any enthusiasm around the table at that time for the name. I certainly don't want to spend time trying to craft a new name here this afternoon, but I'll support Councillor Brown's motion to have staff go away with our consultants and come back with some options, and I think we've heard a fair degree of consensus already, so I'd say let's move on in that path. Thank you.
Your Worship, just
thank you, Mr. Rudolph.
Just on timing, the next scheduled special council meeting is June 8th. Which is 2 weeks out. This is
Why not before then?
You could have it added to your meeting next week, which is a regular council meeting for a decision. We can furnish you with some information around that, so we could we could certainly provide that for you next week.
Next week.
Do I sense that next week works for people? It's a week behind, not the end of the world. I see in my Roman form here the thumbs are going up and not down. The spark has not ignited a fire. I use all the bad puns I possibly can. Someone has stuffed it. It's out, it's done, it's finished, it's over. So I would suggest we pass the motion that Councillor Brown has proposed, leaving it up to staff and others to winnow down the two potentially obvious choices. So if I don't see any other little hands go up, and I don't, Councillor, Councillor Bonner.
Sorry, I just wanted to hop in here just for a second. I want to take a minute. I actually have this type of conversation with clients all the time about their names, their domain names, that sort of thing. And I always bring up the example of Kijiji, and nobody knows what actually it means. But that is a brand people recognize. And it's not so much the name, it's how you brand it, how you do the work, how you convince the people what it is so that they recognize it. All the name is something that they can easily recognize and say, oh, that's the City Spark meeting, or oh, that's an OCP Plus meeting. So it's less so much the name to me, it's more of what we're going to do once we finally do figure out a name. Thanks.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item, as we put short-term solutions over to this evening, is the correspondence from the Old City Quarter request to the city work with the Old City Quarter Association develop a framework and funding strategy. I'm wondering if we can get well, we've got comments from councillors already, unless someone from staff wishes to say something to start us off. Councillor Armstrong, Thorpe, Brown, and Turley.
Your Worship, just mindful of time.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to move the recommendation.
Down there.
Oh, she did, second.
Second to Councillor Martman. All right. We're on to Councillor, I believe I had, was it Thorpe next?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, then it's Councillor Brown and then Turley. Now we're keeping him on time.
I'm good too. I was just going to move. We work with the association.
I'm looking for the recommendation.
There's no recommendation per se. We simply have the correspondence.
What's in the title?
Worship, if you wanted to get a staff report back or refer to staff for some information so that you could make some decisions around it. So the question really before council is do you want to just receive it for information, or would you like it referred to staff to do a report back to you?
Councillor Armstrong, what is your motion?
My motion is that I request that the city work with the Old City Quarter Association to develop a framework and funding strategy for restoring security in the Old City Quarter.
Second.
And then bring it back to council.
I request for the city, should it say staff or is city adequate? Ms. Robertson.
Just for clarity, it might be helpful because there are certain implications that might be associated with it the way it is. If you could perhaps direct for a staff report to come back to council for consideration, but also be able to chat with the Old City Quarter to get their feedback.
Didn't hear what you said.
No, if you can repeat yourself and let's try and get some clarity on this, please. Ms. Robertson.
Mine was written, it says request that the city or city staff work with the Old City Quarter Association to develop a framework and funding strategy for restoring security in the Old City Quarter and bring the report back to council for decision.
Mr. Rudo?
Yeah, so Your Worship, in the letter that's been submitted, there is a proposed framework. Staff could provide comments as to implement that, where the money would come from, how to adjust the levy, which is a procedural piece for the bylaw. There's pieces to this, and then there may be other options. So probably the safest way for council is to receive a sort of an information report, which moves that piece of this along. We're not trying to delay it, but just puts it in some context. And if there are other options, at least give you those ideas so you're aware of them. So I'm looking to you, Mr. Rudolph. You're the CAO. What's the motion you'd like to have on the table? Not that I'm saying... Well, it's not that I would like. I was just suggesting that in this case, it's probably, like so many other things, quite complicated. And my advice to you is to refer it back for a report and direct staff to engage with the Quarter Association to ensure that we are making sure that we're... and perhaps provide them an opportunity to speak to council as well. So this is one of these things that's going to take a little while to work through, to be honest, because of there's a legislative piece to this, and there would be a decision for council with respect to where the funding would come from. So I'm going to go to Councillor Brown, who's been very patient.
Thank you, Worship. I support the motion as is because the letter is not written from the business association. It's written from property owners that obviously have interest and operate within that association. So I think it's important that we engage continue engagement with those property owners, but also with the BIA itself. to get the information fully, to find out, does the VIA officially support it, and then have that information back to council with the funding mechanisms for our consideration.
Councillor Armstrong.
Nothing for me, I already made my motion.
Okay.
Well, question.
So the motion as it reads then, Ms. Robertson?
I'm sorry, I was on the speaker's list.
Sorry, Councillor Turley. Go
Thank
ahead,
you, Your
please.
Worship. Yeah, so in having read this letter and also the report on the social disorder response team, I see a lot of similarities in what solutions may or may not be, and I'm wondering if the two somehow couldn't be melded together.
Worship, and procedurally, what we had suggested the staff that would have left now for the previous side of the item that we're not dealing with is that they would come back tonight at 7 and add a cleanliness report to tonight's meeting. Are you suggesting, Council, that you'd like this to be added as well to the Council agenda for this evening, or to a future, if you're not, so that would mean we'd not deal with it at this stage, we'd move it to this evening's meeting or to a subsequent meeting of Council for further discussion.
I must say that I think Mr. Riddle's suggestion that we defer it to this evening so that the topic can be discussed at the same time as the item that we have already adjourned, the short-term solutions. I don't necessarily think it's going to be wrapped up in one motion or one consideration, but it may be a timely discussion that might well also attract more of the public's attention so they understand the feelings of council, which I think are relatively clear this afternoon, a genuine concern and a recognition of the ongoing social disorder, the impact it's having on not just the old city quarter, but the city downtown in particular. It may be worthwhile, I'm noting the time, it might be more useful. Unless I see great objection, I'm going to suggest that it be added again to that item, the short-term solutions, for a general discussion, and we can perhaps sort out then and there exactly what we want to do. I must say my inclination is not to, whatever we're going to do is to not delay a response to this request from the Old City Quarter, that if we're going to do something, we get on with it. If we're not going to do something, we need to tell them. The summer is coming, the regulations are loosening up. Many of these businesses have struggled to survive for the last couple of months, and delay is not their friend, nor is it ours.
We have a motion on the table.
Yes, and I'm going to suggest, but we can vote on that motion tonight, Councillor.
How do you withdraw?
I'm hearing that there'd be a motion to refer the talk,
I move we defer it to tonight's meeting.
Yeah.
To follow and be companion with the cleanliness report that is also tabled for this evening's meeting.
Okay.
So Councillor Turley has moved deferral to this evening. Is there a seconder? Councillor Thorpe, is there any discussion on deferral to this evening? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None, thank you pardon me. Councillors Gesselbrock and Brown and Armstrong are opposed to deferring it to this evening. Anybody else? Motion carries. I don't see any other business. It's 4 o'clock. Those of you who can, we're due down at the Shaw Auditorium at 4:30. A motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved, Councillor Bartman, second by Councillor Hemmons. Thank you, everyone. It's been a very stimulating afternoon. We're all going to imagine Nanaimo.
Yeah,
Motion carries.